Well, hello, welcome again. Before we get into talking about our text today, I want to begin with a little bit of an explanation, kind of a question that's come up increasingly as we've done these broadcasts. I've said many times before, when we first started doing these broadcasts, we had no real grand assumptions about it. We just simply figured this would be a good way during the lockdowns to stay connected with one another, give me a chance to really kind of speak more directly and extensively into the lives of people in our own congregation. But in that last 2 years, we found that the broadcast has really taken on a broader audience, and quite honestly, we have people who are following these broadcasts as well as my What the World's Coming To podcasts in several countries around the world, and we're pretty, we're thankful for that. But it's created somewhat of a problem, at least, and I hope to clarify it a little bit. Part of the problem is we're getting a lot of emails, a lot of remarks or comments or questions from Instagram, YouTube's, and Facebook and other places where we've put these broadcasts. And we try to read all of the posts that people send in, and particularly if there are some issues that are fairly critical or in people's lives, we try to respond as best we can. But I have to tell you that we're not capable to give a response to everything that we get. We're getting some very significant queries from places like the Philippines, Australia, Western Europe, and different places. And we're thankful for every one of you that's there. But I don't want you to think that we're ignoring your emails. There are some things that kind of fall between the cracks sometimes, and that's usually my aged brain not being able to keep on top of everything. But we appreciate your comments. We appreciate the encouragement. We're thankful that you're there, and if these broadcasts are useful for you, then that's really something that brings a lot of fulfillment and joy into our hearts. But if you write to us something about a specific concern or question you have, it may take a little bit of time for me to get back to you. And also I may have someone else in my staff handle it, because there are a lot of times I just don't have enough time to get to everything. So, but we try to stay on top of it. And so I don't want to discourage you from communicating, even if you're just saying hi or letting us know you're out there. But just kind of be patient with us, because we're not a media company. We're not doing this as media professionals. We're still just kind of putting together the best we can and try to. In fact, quite honestly, we're trying to keep it simple. We don't want to make it something that's more complicated or more involved than just that. I love the idea that we do this, and I feel like we're having a conversation, even though I'm the one doing all the talking. But nonetheless, I feel like it's a chance for us to really kind of touch one another in a more meaningful way. So I appreciate knowing you're there, and I appreciate hearing your feelings and your thoughts. A lot of you just write and say amen, and that's encouraging. But if you write to us about something more involved, it'll take me a little longer to respond. And sometimes some of the questions can be so very complicated that they're not really easy to answer in an email even. So I'll try to direct you towards resources where you can search out the information more on your own in detail. So just want to begin with that kind of that clarification. But getting back to our text, we've been in the 4th chapter of Ephesians, where Paul has really got what I call talking about the lifestyle of the saved. How is a Christian supposed to live? And he begins to delineate some very specific behaviors that should characterize really those of us who are followers of Jesus, and quite honestly, that would give an external evidence to a non-Christian that we are followers of Jesus. That's not our prime objective for following Jesus. We follow Jesus because we want to walk with him and be with him and live in companionship with him in his fellowship. But that has a side effect that if we are walking with Jesus, it tends to become something that those who don't know Jesus and aren't walking with him take note of. And so in that sense, our lives become a witness. That isn't our first objective. Our first objective is to walk closely with God. But the secondary effect, you might say, kind of the result of an apple tree being an apple tree, is you start seeing fruit. You start seeing apples growing on that tree. And the same thing is true, I think, of the Christian life. that as we fellowship with him and as we go deeper into our relationship with Christ, it begins to express itself in some very tangible ways. That our motive isn't to be seen of other people, but at the same time, we should be aware of the fact that other people are watching us as we carry out our journey. Two of the things that we talked about last week was, number one, that we have to be people who speak the truth. And speaking the truth can be a very broad concept when we talk about how that not only do we not lie about things or distort information, but we also don't agree with stuff that's simply not true. And this is where a lot of Christians, find themselves getting in conflict with the culture, because when the government or any authority around them is demanding that we see reality in a certain way, and we just simply say, well, I don't agree with that concept or reality, then you find yourself sometimes being in opposition. And I think the key to dealing with those moments, quite honestly, is that we kind of what's called the Socratic method. Rather than just stating, I disagree and you're wrong, we would sit back and say, I have trouble understanding. I don't really understand how you came to that conclusion. Can you explain to me your point of view? And it's interesting because when you allow other people to express to you their point of view or to share what they see, they're showing them respect. And that's really kind of a key issue, that we need to be respectful listeners. And we also need to learn how to disagree respectfully. We live in this kind of gotcha culture where people try to pin other people to the wall, and that's really not very Christ-like, as we'll go on later on. But the simple fact is that it's giving other people time to explain themselves, and then we can thoughtfully respond. I would also say this in addition, that if you're having that conversation with someone and they share something and you don't know how to answer that, you don't have to be forced to come up with an answer. You can simply say, that's a good point. I haven't really thought about that. Let me go and look into that some more and consider that and see if I can give you a reasonable response. And just set a time to get back with them again. So I think that we have the idea that evangelism or communicating the gospel is this thing that has to happen within a certain limited time frame, that we have 30 seconds to get our point across and bring them into the kingdom. It took most people a long time to get to where they're at, and it's going to take them a long time to get back or get to Christ. And we just need to be patient and understand that most people are won not through a single encounter, but through a series of conversations that they've had over an extended period of time. I think one of the great aspects, a brand new movie that's come out called The Most Reluctant Convert, and it's really the story of how C.S. Lewis came to faith. Now, if you're not a regular reader of C.S. Lewis and are familiar with his books, you might find this kind of a tough view, because it's really not so much based upon the action as we're used to in many movies, but really kind of the philosophical development of his thought through a lifetime, where he went from really atheism to Christianity. And it's really well done. If you love Lewis and you've read his books, you'll become familiarized or reminded of so many of his great statements. But I would encourage you to check that out. Well, anyway, let's move on to the second item we did last week, which was not to be angry, but to be forgiving. And this, again, is a recurring injunction. We'll hit on this throughout this week, because that seems to be really a pitfall for all of us. Anger is a default that many of us go to, especially when we feel like we don't know how to respond. We become angry when we become depressed. We become angry when we feel threatened. And so he's saying that the Christian is somebody who has a control over the issue of anger in their life. They're not just simply a reactive personality, which brings us to where we're at today. And that's where Paul said that we should not be people who steal, but we are people who give. In fact, in verse 28, the text reads this way: "He who steals must steal no longer, but rather he must labor, performing with his own hands what is good, so that he will have something to share with the one who has need." The word steal here is pretty familiar to us, but just for the sake of definition, it means really to take someone else's property, or to take something that belongs to another and keep it unto myself, when we don't have permission to do so, or we don't have the legal right to do that. One of the things that I'm very, very conscious of is time. I don't want to take up people's time unnecessarily, because time is this one resource that we have. We can only spend it once, and once it's spent, it's gone. And so, we need to use our own time in an effective and meaningful way, but also we don't want to take advantage of other people's time. But also, he's talking about the issue of taking other people's property as well. In other words, if you are working for an employer, he or she has given you money and they're buying your time to provide a certain service. And it's important for us to be as faithful and diligent and as honest with the use of that time as we possibly can. I've seen many cases where people have a job, they're being paid to do something, and yet they really are just kind of sitting around doing nothing. And that's a form of theft. We don't often recognize it, but basically you're not living up to the contractual arrangement that you had to fulfill a certain service for the person who is paying with you. And so he says this is really important because we're there to honestly carry out a day's work. And there's nothing, one of the most harmful things to a Christian witness is a Christian who doesn't work hard, who isn't diligent, who isn't faithful, who isn't trustworthy. And so all of those kind of misbehaviors are a kind of theft of something that belongs to someone else. And so if somebody pays me to do something, I'm expected to give it my best effort. And he says basically the reward of that is that you get compensation. And when you have compensation, you have something to give to somebody else. This is interesting, I think, in a sense, and I know I'm going long, but let me just wrap this up by saying we live in a peculiar time, in America at least, where we have not only very high unemployment, we also have many open positions. And in part, some of that's due to the fact that people have been getting so many benefits from the governments and supplements that they don't feel the need to work, and they would prefer to do nothing than to do something. The Bible's very clear, though. It says that we're supposed to be industrious, we're supposed to work with our hands, we're supposed to be productive. And part of the idea of gaining income or becoming increase in our income is not simply so that we can become richer and live more comfortably and more pleasurably, which in itself isn't bad, but that we'd also be more conscious of the fact that as God has blessed us, he's given us the opportunity to bless others, to become generous givers. So anyway, those are some things to think about. We'll pick this up tomorrow because we're going to get into talking about unwholesome words. This, for me personally, what we're going to look at is going to get stiffer and stiffer and more challenging. So I hope that you'll continue with us, and I'll look forward to having this conversation again tomorrow. God bless and go in his grace.